Thanks so much, Sandeep, for doing this. And good morning and welcome to Conversations with BrandKnew, published by ISD Global. Let's begin at the beginning. I would like to know a little bit of your journey, your growing up years, and something about yourself.
Certainly. So yeah, I grew up in. Firstly, thanks for inviting me to the show. I'm delighted to be there. It's always a great opportunity when I like it when I'm able to connect with and converse with people that are in different parts of the world. So thank you for including me in your podcast. Um, so journey-wise, journey begins in India. So I grew up there in Rajasthan. Went to school there in BITS Pilani, which is a well-known engineering school there. Did some, set up some of my own businesses there. And as an entrepreneur, basically realized that, hey, there's something to beyond engineering in terms of learning something about how to manage people, how to manage businesses, how to think about money, and so on. Those are not the things that you typically learn in a engineering
Engineering
education
environment, yeah,
all
yeah,
around
yeah.
electronics, right? So then I thought, look, this is a good chance for me to actually get out in a different part of the world and maybe, expose myself to different experiences. So one thing led to another. And after being an entrepreneur in India for about 4 years, I ended up coming to the United States to do my MBA at Yale. And again, then how life has a way of finding its course, and I ended up staying in the United States and worked in industry for a while, in mainly the marketing area, which was kind of my passion at that point. And then ended up working with Booz, which is a consulting company, a leading consulting company.
Once called Booz Allen Hamilton, right?
When I worked there, it was called Booz Allen and
Oh,
Hamilton, and
okay.
it's gone through many iterations, and I think now it's called Strategy and. But I did 4 years at Booz and then 4 years at McKinsey. And but throughout that time frame, my common thread was really specializing in marketing and helping businesses grow themselves organically through better marketing, which could be everything from branding, pricing, channels, and so on. And ultimately, it led me to my focus on really consumer behavior. So if you do marketing, you gotta love talking to customers, and you gotta love understanding customers and consumers and so on. And so I love that part of the marketing, which is the psychology of how people behave and so on. And you find certain things that are unusual or different than the equation type of life that you get used to as an engineer, where you plug things into an equation and something happens. And when you go and try to do the same thing in marketing and you plug something into an equation, it doesn't happen. So, so that's kind of led me to this whole deep dive, if you will. And now I run after McKinsey, I opened my own firm. And in this firm, we focus very much in that area specifically, which is how do people behave? What accounts for the psychology and connections with consumers? Because that ultimately is what gets you to a happy place in branding.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I mean, obviously, it's very apparent your passion for branding and marketing, which leads me to the next question. Do you think there is probably a room for a synonym between behavior science and marketing?
I think so. I mean, which is what led me to write this book. And it's interesting that you asked that question, because when I asked that question of myself, my definitive answer was yes. And then when you look around, you don't see as many books which have drawn that line between marketing and behavioral science in a strategic way. I mean, there are books that have what I would call tactical marketing, where somebody might say, hey, you should have more white space on your website, or, don't show the shopping cart as overfull, because then people feel like they're done. Those are like very tactical things. It's not strategy. It's like little nudges here and there. I see the whole art and science of nudges as being tactical, but behavioral science is actually bigger than that. And where where I saw a need, and behavioral science, as you know, has been applied in many different fields. It's been applied in public policy, it's been applied in economics and investing and finance, all of those different areas.
Absolutely.
Uh, but what about
The
branding?
IRA, I think, the IRS, right? The Internal Revenue in the
Yeah,
US, you're filing your tax returns. I think all of it has been applied there, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah. I mean, those types of things have been applied there. It's been applied, for example, to encourage people to donate organs and stuff like that. So it's been done. A lot of good things have been done with it. But we didn't ask the question that how does behavioral science really help you design brands differently, right? And we didn't ask the question, how can you change experiences as a result? And brands are something more than just a little nudge here and there. Brand is something, it's like a personality, it's like a person, it's like a relationship. So it's not just a little nudge. It's what is this thing fundamentally about? What is its DNA and so on? And can behavioral science, in fact, help you decipher that DNA of the brand? Can it help you get a better understanding of why consumers sometimes don't do things that you expect them to do, and help you explain why certain brands become so big and then other brands just fall flat? So those are the types of things where behavioral science needs to be applied. And I do think so. I consider these to be what is called consilient sciences, which is these sciences that are all converging. So you've got
Or maybe
behavioral
Tweedledee and Tweedledum, maybe.
science. Yeah, it's so I mean, there's a number of pieces there, Suresh. So it's a behavioral science, it's cognitive psychology, social anthropology, linguistics, and you know what the consilience there is, and what I talk about in my book is that in all of these different sciences, what the researchers have been trying to do is to understand how the human mind works, right? So even if you're a linguist, right, there is a certain area of the brain which really focuses on the linguistic capability, right? Which is why it is hard to learn languages when you're older. The social anthropology, they're also trying to understand how humans have behaved over time in societies and so forth. So all of these people have sort of converged on this idea that we need a better understanding of how the brain works. And when they get that understanding of how the brain works, they get into additional light on their respective fields. In my case, all of this has been about understanding choice, because at the end of the day, what is branding, right? Branding is choice. How do you pick one brand over the other and so on, right? So there's a lot of research that has been done in this field of choice, which stems from this whole notion of understanding how our brains work better. And there's a lot of scientific discoveries that have come in, but for whatever reason, marketers haven't sort of sat down and said, hey, what does this mean for my brand? And so that's what if you will, that's the gap that I've sought to address here.
That's fantastic, Sandeep. Just again, that dovetails us into the next thing that I wanted to ask you. I know you're deeply immersed in cognitive branding. Okay. Would you want to offer a simplistic articulation of what is cognitive branding?
Cognitive branding, yeah. So it is different, and maybe it helps to sort of contrast it with how we've thought about brands before. So typically, if you're a marketer, that's one of the, when you come out with a new product, that's one of the first things you have to decide, what is this brand going to be about? And historically, what marketers have done is that they go out, they ask consumers, hey, what's important for you? And you do lots of surveys, and if you're coming out with a car, you might say, somebody might say, I like speed, I like power, I like a nice luxurious interior, and so on. So these are different things that people like, and then they say,
How the
oh,
leather smells.
the way it smells and all that. And then, they say, well, what's the most important out of this? What's the next most important out of this? And then they try to craft a brand message, which is around that. And then marketers over time discovered that, hey, just telling people these functional benefits is not enough. You should put some emotion around it. So they started putting some emotion around it. So they would not just say, it's just the fastest car. They'll say it's just the most exhilaratingly fastest car. So then you've got that exhilaration in the but it was very artificial the way these things were sort of layered on by, hey, let's put this layer of icing on it, then let's put this other layer and so on. And there was no reason to believe that the human brain just would get entranced just because you added some emotion to it or just some functional benefit to it. And as I started doing a lot of branding work, that is what I was discovering, that you went through that process and you would create some kind of a brand message and so on. It would be like, blah, nothing would happen. And then you started sort of thinking about, well, what's going on here? That is what led me to ultimately what I call cognitive branding. And in cognitive branding, it's also very intuitive. So let me just kind of explain the logic behind it, and then it sort of makes sense. So one is, the first question you ask is, what is it that's inside our brains, right? And really it's two things. It's experiences and fantasies. And what that means is that as we go through life, we have lots of different experiences, right? Every second we're having an experience. You and I are having an experience right now. But what the brain does is it doesn't make like a recording of it, like an exact, tape recording of it. What it does is it sort of takes in all that information, and then it thinks about it. It sort of, mulls over it, and it creates learnings out of those things. Okay.
Probably what the Kahneman system 1, system 2, it gets probably compartmentalized.
It gets compartmentalized in some form. So all your experiences are stored in some form of learnings. And all those things are in your brain, right? It can be rules, they can be beliefs, they can be values, and all of those types of things, but they're not exact memories, okay? And so that's what's in your brain. So those are experiences. And then on the other hand, what else is in there? Well, there are also things that haven't happened to you. Those are your fantasies and your aspirations. And those also can feel very real sometimes, right? I mean, the things that haven't happened can feel very real if you dream about them enough. They sort of get written into your brain, and it feels like, gee, I think I was there, but you actually weren't there. So there's that fantasy piece of it. So what you have to do when you're doing cognitive branding is you have to make the brand some kind of a trigger or a key that unlocks one of those experiences in the person's brain, or sort of unlocks one of those aspirations in their brain. So what the example of that would be, you may remember, if I create some kind of an ice cream or ice cream product, but I sort of tie it to your childhood experiences when you were out in some of the streets and enjoying some local ice creams and so on. I said, this is like something like that. When I connect it, then it suddenly brings back all of those emotions, all of those memories,
Absolutely.
and all of those things.
Nostalgia marketing.
Nostalgia marketing, you could yeah, I mean, you could say that. And so one part of it can be that. The other part of it can be the unlocking people's fantasies. So where you feel like, MasterCard might come back with its priceless campaign, but what they're saying is that, look, by spending money on their card, you can create these priceless moments, or you can create this priceless future for people, or you can achieve your dreams or something. So then the card has become the key that you use not just to buy something, but to actually create special experiences.
Live your fantasy
or live your fantasy. So then it becomes a bigger thing, because then it is tied to those things. So that is where the connection becomes tighter versus just saying, hey, let's put some emotion on this thing, right? So that's what cognitive branding is all about. It is making making brands the keys that unlock these sensations of past experiences, cherished moments, or your harbored fantasies.
Permit me an obvious question, Sandeep. Obviously, there's wealth of insights, experiences, learnings, unlearning. What was the inspiration for you to kind of write branding between the years? Was there a trigger point? Was it Eureka one day out of the bath and you said, okay, I'm going to kind of write this? Or has it been building up over a period of time? Was it a simmer or a slow burn, as they call it?
Yeah, it was a slow burn. I mean, as as a practicing marketer, so I've been doing branding for the last 20 years. And like I said, you would do certain things and you would think that you had done everything exactly right, and then it didn't quite work out. And then you have to sort of step back and say, like, what the heck is going on here? So, I remember this moment, which I describe in the book as well, where I was working with one of my clients, which AbbVie, which makes a drug which is called Humira. It's like a huge drug now. At the time I worked on it, initially it was like a $300 million drug. It's like now a $20 billion drug
Wow.
worldwide. Yeah, so it's huge, one of the biggest brands in the world. And so I was, talking to one of the patients that has rheumatoid arthritis, so this is what the drug was initially for. And I was just talking to her. I was telling her, look, my client has come out with this new drug, which is fantastic. It's a completely new biologic kind of a drug. We've never had things like this before. And it's going to make your life pain-free and stiffness-free and all of this stuff. And you're going to feel really great. And I just didn't feel like she was, listening to
Connecting.
me at all. There was no connection. And I'm sort of thinking to myself, like, what's going on here? And then suddenly she sort of turns around to me and looks me in the eye and says, Sandeep, how are you going to help me if you don't understand what I'm going through in my life? And I was kind of like a little taken aback, like, it's like, why do I need to understand your life and what you're going through? I'm telling you, this drug is going to make you better, right? Better than anything you've had before. What else do you need to know? It doesn't matter whether I understand your life or not. But it was important for her that unless I showed that we had established that chemistry, that we had established that connection, nothing that I was going to say was going to be accepted by her. Right. So the brand message was not going to sink in. If we just put a brand message there that said new revolutionary product that's going to make your life better, people were not going to accept it. What they wanted to see was whether we understood what they were going through. So, for example, when we did some of the first few ads, we showed a woman with rheumatoid arthritis, and you could and you wouldn't know if you were watching that television ad, you wouldn't know, but if a person that had rheumatoid arthritis would know, because that she'd be seen braiding her daughter's hair. Okay. And if you look closely, you could see that her hands were a little deformed because of the disease, but she was braid. Now, if you have rheumatoid arthritis and you haven't been treated, you would never be able to do that. You would not be able to braid your daughters. You may not even be able to make breakfast for your daughter. Right. So by putting those scenes front and center, we sort of established this special
Very
secret language.
subliminally.
Yeah, where people who had that disease could understand, wow, that's a real change. That's what makes me feel bad about myself when I'm not able to dance with my husband, when I'm not able to make lunch for my kids when they're leaving in the morning. That's what gives me, it was kind of this moment where we discovered that the disease was taking people's self-esteem away, right? Imagine if you're a woman, and
Yeah.
another creative that we had was a woman just reaching behind to unhook her bra. Now, imagine if you're a woman and you can't do that. That means you need help every day.
Right.
So just putting some of those
Dignity.
things which showed the connection, that we understood what we were talking about. We understood their lives. And if you go and read a branding book, it will not tell you that. So this is what I call like brands with empathy. You will not find any discussion of brands with empathy. The branding books are not going to talk about, hey, you need to understand what these people are going through. You need to understand that connection with them. So it was a kind of it was a revolutionary thing at that time in branding. So it's, so if you ask if there was a moment, that was certainly a moment that made me pause and think like, this is something different.
There's far to it that meets the eye.
Yeah, exactly. And there are more things there. The other thing that I describe, and there are many different dimensions this can go in. The other thing that I describe in the book, because one of the key things about the cognitive branding models is what I call brand vibes, which is this whole idea of brands with empathy and also brands with values. So brands with values are slightly different. These are brands that show to the consumer and establish that connection with the consumer by sort of telling them that they share their values. What is a value? A value is something, your belief about what is right or wrong. And that's where the brand is saying we share the same values about what's right or wrong. And if you, take a example from Asia of a brand, you could look at Tata Tea, for example. So Tata Tea came out with this big campaign in which, and they were number 3 in the market at that time, or pretty far, a distant number 3. And they came out with this campaign, which is called Jagore.
Yeah,
So
I know.
on one hand, it's
Yeah,
just
and
basically
I think they
saying
timed it just before one of the elections, Lok
they
Sabha
timed it just,
election.
yeah, exactly. So they had that ad where they show this politician who comes and demands, sort of almost assumes that he deserves everybody's vote, and where this guy just starts interviewing him and saying, "Hey, what are your qualifications? Why would I vote for you?" And that guy's taken aback that you want to know my qualification, because in India, we know how corruption has been a problem, especially amongst the politicians, and so you had this brand that was taking a stand and telling people to jogore. So what they were really saying was, don't just drink your tea to wake up, but awaken, right?
Yeah,
Awaken and
absolutely.
take part
The
and
metaphorical connection,
yeah, so that was
beautifully
just a great way
established.
to take that idea of waking up with your tea to awakening with your tea, and sort of tapping into the angst that the general public, the helplessness that the general public feels in India about all the corruption that goes around them, and especially with the politicians who take advantage of them. And so in that moment, that campaign just captured everybody's hearts by tapping into people's sense of value. So that was a brand with value. And Tata's have actually done a number of things. If you look at what they've done with their Tanishq brand in jewelry and so on, they've taken a number of stands where
In fact,
they've
there is a
aligned with
beautiful
people's values.
campaign that they did for, there is another brand, which is a local brand in Kerala called Kannan Devan tea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they acquired it. And if you look at, like most states, if you look at Kerala, the north, the south, the center, whatever it is,
Yeah.
the lingo and the dialect changes. And
Okay.
in a lot of cases, it changes so drastically that what is something which is very appeasing and inspiring could be almost like an expletive in another part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they show this, a congregation of different people in different parts, all talking their own language, interpretations and meaning of which is different, but all confluencing towards a common theme. That is beautifully established. So yeah, exactly. I think they are doing a damn good job. In fact, one
They're
more
doing a good
brand,
job.
which is of course a global brand, and I've heard Brian Chesky talk about it, is that the challenge when they launch something like an Airbnb,
Yeah.
wherein you are designing for trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
10 years ago, who would have actually imagined that you and me would be happily going into a stranger's home, let alone sleep on a stranger's bed?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that is a very important point. I mean, so in some of these examples, what you will see is that campaigns and brands have been able to be successful without actually without dwelling on the product itself. So, if you think about that Tata tea campaign, they didn't talk about how their tea leaves were the
The product
freshest.
is a distant annex. You're right, absolutely.
No,
I
the
mean,
product was kind of there, but they really focused on that connection. And that's a very new idea in branding, because branding, if you just ask somebody, hey, what's branding? They'll say, hey, figure out how your product is different and talk about that difference. But these guys weren't doing that. They were talking about values, right?
right.
And the example that you give, which is sort of saying that, people were talking about understanding how those cultural and linguistic shifts can take place as you go from one place to another. So these things are different, and it takes a new kind of understanding, a new kind of skill to be able to design brands which do that. And when you do it well, because it's not easy to do it well, but when you do it well, it has a huge impact, and people are just blown away that, like, what the heck just happened here, right? That kind of thing.
I think, Sandeep, I believe you're the best person to ask this question. And it's something that we practice at ISD Global. It's an SOS world, right? Sea of sameness, increasingly commoditized,
Yeah.
and the once revered USP, or the unique selling proposition, is probably an outdated model. And increasingly for brands, as you mentioned, to stand out, impact, influence, engage, in the reverse order, as I meant, is what you're looking for is UFP, probably, which is a unique feelings proposition. How does a brand make
Mm-hmm.
you feel when you're
Mm-hmm.
associating with it or consuming it? So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's a little bit more than that, because what happens is if you just go to how does it make you feel, it's actually a good question. How does it make you feel is a very good question. But sometimes people answer that question by just saying, oh, I just need to make them feel something or anything, right? Just put any kind of emotion. That's not what it is.
No, yeah.
You've got to really, the feelings that you arouse are feelings that must connect to something in their experience, something that is a shared moment. So that's what it was with Taudatis, that they tapped into this feeling that already existed, and they didn't
And
create that feeling.
brilliantly contextual as well.
Yeah, and they just kind of just tapped into it. Because that's one thing you need to remember, which is that people do not change behavior overnight. It's just not that easy. So, which is why the Airbnb example that you were describing, it takes a while for those things to sink in. And therefore, you have to do some of these deeper strategies, because otherwise people are just not going to do it. They're going to be scared to go into a stranger's home. They're going to be scared to go into a stranger's car, all these types of things. And what had happened was that the first internet revolution, and that was the other kind of awakening moment for me, when the first internet revolution happened, that was in 2000 to 2002.
Yeah, just after
Okay.
the Y2K.
Yeah, just after the Y2K, everybody felt like that all the physical businesses were going to collapse and everything was going to be online. And in the United States, there were grocery businesses that came up, there were banking businesses that came up. And the one thing that is common about all of the businesses that came up at that time, they've died. The other thing that is common about those
As
businesses
they
is
call
that they
not
all
so fondly the Web 1.0, right?
the Web 1.0. So all those businesses about, there was a company called pets.com. There was a company which was for pet food, Webvan, which was for groceries. There was,
WebMD for medicine, I think. No, was it?
yeah, those, there was also another banking company. But all of those things didn't fly. But those are all things that are done on the internet today. You're
Yeah.
buying groceries on your mobile phone. You're doing your banking on. So what has changed? So what we discovered at that time was that the reason that those things didn't happen was because you didn't allow time for behavior change. Let me give you a modern day example. Metaverse, right? You had Mark Zuckerberg go and say, well, the future is the metaverse. I'm changing my whole company and blah, blah, blah. And this is going to be the future. And I think he's right, actually. However, currently the metaverse has only 300,000 users. And that whole company, the Facebook stock, or what they renamed the company Meta, is declined 70%
The
in
world's
the
first
last
rebrand.
1 year. Yeah. And so it's gone from $1 trillion to, whatever, take 70% off. And it's the same mistake that marketers are making, which is the same mistake Mark Zucker is making, that same mistake. He's thinking that people will change their behavior overnight. That Airbnb will be the biggest thing just tomorrow. I'll come out with it today and tomorrow it'll be the biggest thing. So let's just, no, you've got to give people time to shift their behavior. And there's a biologic reason for that, by the way, which is if, again, you go back and ask the question, what's in the brain? So I said, okay, it's your learnings, it's your fantasies. But how do they exist there? They exist there because the cellular matrix that is in your brain has changed to record those learnings, to record those fantasies. Now, can you change the cellular matrix overnight? No, it takes a long time, right? I mean, if you've ever had a scar, how long does it take for a scar to go away? Because biology doesn't change that far. And your memories and your fantasies are biology at the end of the day. And therefore, to change those things, it takes time, which is why it's very important to understand behavior shifts, understand what changes it faster or slower. But no matter what you do, it's not going to be overnight magic. It
And
takes time.
plus, the brain is hardwired to be lazy in any case. That doesn't help either.
Yeah, I mean, and it is lazy.
It's
And like I said,
probably the laziest organ in the body, right?
yeah, and it's lazy for that reason, right? Which is, you're trying to say, it's like looking at your scars and saying, geez, this scar is lazy. It's not getting better right now. It's taking 3 months to go away, and it's a lazy scar. No, it's not a lazy scar. It's a scar. And that's what your brain is. It's full of all these scars, which represent your learnings and your fantasies.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Sandeep, you run an organization called Serenti, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around to figure out what exactly is the inspiration and the meaning of Serenti.
Yeah, so I mean yeah, that's an interesting question too, because so part of the first part of that really comes from the idea of cerebral, so drawing on the brain, that idea. And so it's a kind of a mix of different terms, but the idea for us as a consultant was to um, communicate
Walk the
this
walk.
idea. Yeah, walk the walk, and also the action through wisdom kind of an idea. So, little being more thought, before acting, sometimes people say, oh, just execute, execute, execute. No, we're the kinds of guys that says, no, let's be a little thoughtful here. Let's understand these things. And then, yeah, we will execute, but it is action that is going to be inspired by wisdom. So that is that is kind of the sentiment that is encapsulated in what our company name is. And it is kind of the sentiment that has made us successful, and it is the kind of the sentiment that has led to this whole type of thinking around cognitive branding, because we had to, we did execute, we did fail in many of those cases, and then we had to step back and said, what's the wisdom? What are we learning here? So that's what it is. But the company itself um, works, we generally work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies in the healthcare space, in the financial services space, in the consumer product space. And we help them with figuring out what their brands should be about, or to help them turn around their brands and so on. So that is a big component of what we do. Or when they're launching products, then we help them figure out what should the essence of this brand be, and use all of these new things that we're talking about in those things.
Okay. I think probably this is the flavor of the season, right? Brand purpose.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And amidst all the greenwashing and other things that go around,
Yeah.
which in your reckoning, maybe if you can just probably in the fingers of one hand, say that okay, these are the people who are getting brand purpose right in every sense of the term. What would
Yeah.
those brands be?
So, in the book, there is a chapter which is called Brands with Purpose. And there are a few things I talk about. And I think, as you might imagine, working with senior executives, you've got to give them easy ways of thinking about these things, right? Things that can be. So there are, two or three things that I talk about in terms of how to do brands with purpose correctly or in the right way. One is that it should fundamentally, whatever you're doing, whatever purpose you get involved with or associate with your brand, it should be something that is connected to what your brand is about, what the DNA of that brand is. Okay. Second thing is that it should be something that you do. And when I say you, the brand, better than anybody else, or better than others by virtue of who you are, and by virtue of what your company is, and by virtue of skills and assets that you have. Okay. And then the third thing is that, of course, you have to have a deep commitment to it, and as in the CEOs and the top suite people actually believe in those things. So let me just kind of cover those one by one. So one is this whole idea of it should be related to your brand. So what brand with purpose doesn't just mean that, okay, whatever, for every product, every whatever it is, every pen that you buy, I will send 10 cents to this organization. That's not. If you go to most Fortune 500 companies and you open their annual report or their report of giving, you will see like 2 pages of all the charity organizations that they donate money to. That doesn't mean they've become a brand with purpose, right? It just means they give to 200 charities. Somebody gets $100 check, somebody gets $1 million check, but there's like 200 of them. And many companies, in fact, say, okay, you, the employee, decide who you want to give to, and we'll match it. Right. So, so there's thousands of places these companies are giving money to. That doesn't mean that there are companies with purpose.
Purpose.
It just means that they are
They're
giving an
ticking one
employee
box.
benefit. Yeah, it's an employee benefit. So what you have to do is to really closely associate it. And there are brands which have deeply done that. So, for example, one of the companies I talk about is a shoe company, which is called Allbirds, which has become very famous here. And, and over the last, they started maybe 10 years back, and they're now a big company in comfort shoes. But they made a real commitment to coming up with shoes that were not just comfortable and, and good looking, but that were made out of, but were green, so to speak. So out of recycled substance and so on. And then they've devoted their entire company to that mission, right? That they just focus on that, and they spend real money in R&D in making sure that shoelaces are coming out of eucalyptus trees, and the canvas is made out of some other, natural substances and so on. So they made that commitment, and they support green causes. So that becomes a brand with purpose, because there's that clear alignment, right? And they are doing something that they are able to do better than anybody else. If you say that, hey, if you listen to my podcast, I'll give $10 to somebody in this organization. Well, I can do that myself. What do I need you for? I can send them $10 myself. So it should be something, so if you're a podcaster and I'm just making, you might become a better brand with purpose if you, for example, went to other people and taught, you went to, let's say, disadvantaged kids in schools and so on, and taught them how to become better communicators, because that's a skill that you have better than other people. So those are some essential elements of becoming a good brand with purpose. It should be associated with your brand. It should be something that you can do better by virtue of the assets and skills that you have. And 3, it must have you personally involved, not just the guys that work for you, but you personally really committed to that cause in a very meaningful way.
I think just to kind of extend that thought, another brand that comes to mind is Patagonia.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, really walking the walk, and, right from the ownership level downwards.
I mean, the owner of that company, and I'm forgetting his name, but
he recently resigned, right?
He resigned, and he committed to giving the entire company, to green causes, which is what his Patagonia, the brand, has been all about. He's donated the entire money, to his entire fortune, to that. So that is the extreme case where you see a real commitment. But you can make real commitments, like I said, not just by the magnitude of the commitment, but also by your personal involvement, which can be important.
Like that, I don't want to leave you without asking this question, Sandeep. Over the years, which are the books and people that have really, really inspired you?
Oh, that, again, that's a pretty long list, because, like I said, the whole basis of the work that I did in this is to really make the sciences consilient, in the sense that, draw on many different sources, because there's a lot of good stuff that's out there. I mean, that's the beauty of the times that we live in, that there's lots of rich material to draw on. But certainly, as far as thinking how you think, and how you think instinctively or deliberatively, the book that you pointed out, which is Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, Kahneman's work, is certainly quite inspirational, and I highly recommend that everybody read that book. That's one of the things. The other place which I draw on interest, and I'm going to just give you like different types of things that are there. The other thing that I draw on as far as deliberative thinking is concerned, which is System 2 thinking, is interestingly enough from the field of cognitive behavior therapy. And there's a guy by the name of David Burns. The Feeling Good, that's his book, David Burns. I'm just looking at my shelf right there. So he basically, now he's a psychiatrist, but he practices cognitive behavior therapy, and that is all about taking people that are, let's say, depressed or anxious and so on, right? And they are anxious because, or they have anxiety problems because their brain works in a particular way, which is different from how other people's brain works, and it makes them more anxious. And he sort of makes them dwell on, look, why are you thinking in that way? Let's step back and see how it would help you to think in a different way. So he sort of, by deliberation, changes that behavior. So if you read Feeling Good, which again is a really good book, it teaches you as a marketer to sort of come out with these new and different ways of changing people's behavior by deliberation or system two. So that's that's another interesting one. There's a lot of research these days that's going on in the field of happiness. Now, when we talk about happiness, you may think that, oh, these are those 60s style happy people, hippies, and so on. But that's not what it is. In fact, in psychology, I would dare say that there's more research going on in the field of happiness versus anything else. And there are several different lectures and books that are out there, from Yale.
Who is
There's
that
Laurie
Yale
Santos.
professor, Sandeep, at
Laurie
Dr. Laura?
Santos.
Laurie
Yeah,
Santos. Yeah,
Laurie
okay.
Santos. And so, yeah, you can see her lectures that are available, which are very popular. But in my book, what I argue is that you can do the brand wise, which is where we talked about brands with empathy and brands with values. You can do brand sense, which is where you make your value proposition make sense either instinctively or deliberately. And then the third piece that I talk about in the book, as far as cognitive brands are concerned, or the structure or the architecture of these brands, is brand resolve. And brand resolve, the basic thing I argue is that things that are going to really make you take action and go buy the brand are things that make you happy. And happiness is sort of a driver of what we call intrinsic, what psychologists would call intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivations are things that you do just because you're motivated by yourself, from an innate capability to do certain things.
Absolutely.
And so there's a lot of research on that. Laurie Santos is a good one. The other one that I would go to was something called self-determination theory, which is about intrinsic motivation, which is by two professors from University of Rochester in New York, which is Dacey and Ryan. So their book is also very important. So yeah, so I mean, I think some of these books are easy to read, or people who don't want to necessarily read can probably find lectures by these professors on Coursera, on YouTube, and so on, which are very eminently watchable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, one book that comes to mind, it doesn't kind of fall into a vertical which can be called consumer psychology or behavioral science or anything, but it's immensely, I would say, uplifting and empowering, is a book by Matthew Barzin called The Power of Giving Away Power.
Ah, yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay. And because it's so much of a release, and then you're able to kind of energize yourself to a fantastic, you touched upon the intrinsic motivation, right? Because there are so
Yes.
many things, so many cobwebs in the head, right? And you're holding on to something which is needless. Okay.
Yeah.
And, the power of giving away power, is, I think, it's a seminal work, I mean, it takes a lot of doing to and lots of courage to do it. But once you do it, the kind of power that you get with that, it's
Yeah.
very contrarian, it's very counterintuitive, but it is just significant, So I was quite inspired by that book as well.
Yeah. And you're onto something there because, like I said, all these books that I named, none of them are about marketing.
Yeah,
None of
exactly.
those
Very
books are
good.
about
Very good.
marketing, so that's you have to make that. I mean, and that's my book is about marketing, but it draws on these books. And when you look
Exactly.
at the resources and so on, there's like 150 different references in the book. But you can, but I think most of those references are outside of the marketing field.
So if you look at, just to give you another example, as you mentioned, your book is about marketing, but you've done research and referenced, so many material which is nothing to do with marketing, right? Even if you look at Ryan Holiday's books, it gets categorized as marketing. But
Yeah,
the inspiration is Stoicism and the Greek philosophers and all of that, right? And how he
yeah,
kind of combines all that into a very,
yes,
very interpretable, consumable kind of articulation. So
it
in
is, it
fact, that
is.
is
And
why one grouse with the current zeitgeist. Otherwise, as you mentioned, we are very fortunate to be living in those times wherein we are exposed to all kinds of worlds. Wherein I think there is too much of emphasis on STEM, the science,
yeah,
technology,
yeah,
engineering, math, and it is coming at the cost of culture, anthropology, history, etc., etc. If there can be a nice, happy confluence that could be created,
yeah.
I think we would be far better off. I don't have any complaints
I
of them kind of taking the star status or the podium status. but I think, it should not come at the cost of anthropology, culture, history. I think there is a lot that can come in.
I think you're absolutely right about that. And where we see that, and as you know, in the Asian culture, STEM is very important, almost,
You got only
STEM
100 out of 100 in
exclusive.
math.
Yeah. I mean, I did that. I mean, by the time I was in India, what was called the 11th and 12th grade, I was down to just 4 subjects, and they were all STEM. Right? And but it's very different here in the United States, by the way, where people, when you go to high school, you keep a lot of those other subjects, the arts, for a long time. And even in the university education, there's a big emphasis on things like critical thinking, which stem from philosophy, from
You can do
psychology, from
music and
history, and
neuroscience,
so
right?
on. Huh?
You can do music and neuroscience.
Yeah, and then and what you find is that if you look at the education in the United States, people don't always do well on math and science. So they'll say, oh, if you look at the United States math scores and science scores, and so you see that, oh, you were number 20 on the list. However, the contradiction is that most of the things, the most of the excellence in different fields actually happens in the United States. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about neurosurgery, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about literature, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about space,
Space,
it doesn't matter what,
entertainment.
entertainment, Hollywood, all these different things. People reach a level of excellence here, which is quite fascinating. And you have to ask yourself, well, how come they get there with such lousy scores in STEM? You know, how come we're the guys that are making the rockets? How come we're the guys here that are making, unbelievable films? How come we have unbelievable ballet and all these things, and we're lousy in math? Well, I mean, the answer is that math isn't everything, maybe, So, so you
Go
gotta,
figure it out yourself. Go do the math.
and that's what I mean. You sometimes reflect on these things by running into a wall. You basically go and say, okay, if math and STEM was the greatest thing, then how come all those advances aren't coming out of the countries which are at the top of those lists?
Right.
You know what I'm
Absolutely.
saying?
Absolutely.
So you
Absolutely.
have to think about these things. You have to have some wisdom. You have to have some reflection, and then it leads you to insights that are counterintuitive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sandeep. It's been fascinating and insightful, and I'm sure listeners and readers will find great value in it. I'll just pause the record button as of now.